All right. We are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of our fall virtual learning series, Career Bootcamp Preparation Series, Understanding the Importance of CBC Topics. In this session today, we'll cover a few of our objectives. Just go to the next slide. Perfect. So some of the objectives that we'll be covering in today's session are to explore the significance of Career Bootcamp 2025 topics and why they matter to you. This year's CBC will include various themes such as values and ethics in the workplace, enhancing your LinkedIn profile, handling challenging workplace conversations, gaining insights into global perspectives and shaping your professional outlook, self-reflection techniques, and regional perspectives and career development for regional employees. Please note that this session is being offered in English. The French session will be taking place from 2:30 to 3:30 Eastern Time today. You can also view recordings of all our Federal Youth Network, learning sessions on our YouTube page. Now, I'd like to start, before we begin, with a land acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge that I have the pleasure of joining you from the territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I would also like to recognize that there are learners who are joining from across the country on different lands and encourage all of you to take a moment to acknowledge the land that you're joining us from today. Now, as we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button. You can vote your questions that you like most by clicking on the thumbs up button. And as with all Fin sessions, this session will be recorded, so don't worry, you can go back and check it out anytime. Check out as well as other session recordings and the podcast series at a later date. We would also like to note that the PowerPoint presentations for each session, including this one, is included in our wiki page so that you can feel free to follow along at your own rate and improve your learning experience. Now, also, one more thing to mention, that all the resources shared during this session will be added to our wiki under resources section. Now, I'd like to start by introducing myself. As your moderator today, I will be moderating this session. My name is Antonia Macris. I am the Manager of Corporate Learning in the HR branch at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I'm also have the privilege of being the co-chair of the ECCC National Youth Network at Environment Canada. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce some of the panelists that we are fortunate to have with us here today that will be sharing their insights with us and covering some of the topics we're diving into together. So if I'd like to, perfect. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to please turn on your cameras, and I'll introduce you briefly, and then we'll pass it over to begin. All right, so with us today, we have Khadija El-Sibai. Khadija is an analyst in the Business Data and Analytics team at the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, on a regulator in the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. Our second panelist today is Haley Ellis. Haley started as a student at the Canadian Revenue Agency, where she worked as an income tax auditor. She has a passion for learning and development and was the co-chair of the Hamilton Niagara Tax Services Office, YPN, for 3 years. We're happy to have Haley with us today. She is the Events and Partnerships Coordinator for the Federal Youth Network. And our third panelist we have with us is Tony Buongiorno. Tony's life mission is to help others feel good about themselves. His passion is to meet and talk with other human beings. He has been with the Federal Service since 2020, and he currently works as a senior HR advisor in the Office of Workplace Harassment and Violence Prevention at IRCC. So I invite you all to take a look at our 3 panelists' bios, including my bio as well, if you'd like. They are in the PowerPoint, so you could further explore the background of our talented speakers today. All right. So with that, without further ado, we'll start off with our first panelist to start off our presentations.
Thank you very much, Antonia. Good afternoon, everyone. And what we will essentially be doing today
So I'll pass it over to Khadija.
Thank you very much, Antonia. Good afternoon, everyone. And what we will be essentially doing today is sharing with you, exploring really some of these topics that we will be sharing, that we will be further exploring during Career Bootcamp, really giving you a sneak peek into a bit of what the content will be like, but really not giving away much. So it's very much to tell you, this is what's coming your way. One topic that we will be discussing is values and ethics and really how to navigate that throughout your career, on a day-to-day basis. There's been a lot of discussion about values and ethics. We're all aware it's a priority of the clerk, a priority of all of our deputy heads. For this session, I think we'll be taking a different approach. And so I think we'll be really focusing more on what does, for instance, respect for democracy, respect for people, what does that really look like in our day-to-day jobs? And so by looking at that, we'll really be giving you some pointers or some ways to further explore what that really looks like so that you can also better understand your role as a public servant, better understand how you can act and navigate some of these ethical dilemmas that can easily come up, and then also so that you can always be confident in being able to handle all these challenges or all these issues that may arise. And so really in us talking about values and ethics, what we're really looking to do is continue some of that conversation, continue to provide you some of that support so that we can all continue to maintain healthy, equitable, and diverse workplaces. And so, of course, what we can, and so another one of those topics that we will be talking about as well, is with respect to being an employee in the regions. And so, more than half of the public service is, of course, based in the regions. And many of us are very aware that it's not always easy being an employee in the region. We feel like there are less opportunities for us. I actually work out of Toronto, so I know what it's like to be an employee in the regions. And so during Career Boot Camp, we once again this year have a session specifically focused on developing your career within the regions, because you can definitely have a meaningful career just by working in the regions. So what we do want to do in this session is we will provide very tangible, concrete steps that you can take to really figure out how do you go about building your career in the regions. And you'll also get to hear from some of the speakers. All those speakers for our panel or for our session on building your career in the region are all regional employees. So we'll get to both hear from their experiences and how they have been able to do it, and also take away many tangible strategies for doing that. And I think I'll pass it on to, I believe, Haley, and she'll tell us more about some of the other sessions.
Thank you so much, Khadija. So first up, I'll talk to you a little bit about the workshop on LinkedIn. If you attended our in-person learning days, we did discuss LinkedIn a little bit during the learning days. And what we found is that depending on the regions, there isn't a lot of people that actually use LinkedIn, and people wanted to know how can we use LinkedIn and make the most of it. So this is what this workshop is about: how to create that LinkedIn account that's going to stand out for all of the right reasons. So by joining us, hopefully we'll all benefit. It's not to say that you have to be on social media. It's that this is where there is a lot of connections and a lot of networks being kind of made. And so if you're wanting to get involved, LinkedIn is kind of that place to be. So that is the purpose of the LinkedIn session. Moving on, we have a workshop on understanding global work cultures. You might be asking yourself, why do I need to learn about international stuff if I'm not working on international files? And it really comes down to the basics of understanding why we do the things that we do, helping build connections. Through the work that I do, I've had the pleasure of working with multiple international work networks, a couple of which we'll be featuring during this workshop. And it just really gives that broader perspective on the work that we do, what other governments are doing, how we can improve the services that we do, and just building your network. You never know when you might need someone in a specific, to know someone in a specific thing. So that's really what the purpose of this workshop is just giving that overview of the different networks out there, the different governments, how they work, how they're different, how they're similar. So I'm really excited for this. We have some amazing panelists from Apolitical, from the United Nations. We have a speaker in the English workshop that's from the US equivalent of APEX. So it's going to be a really exciting workshop, and I hope that you can all come out and join us. With that, I'll turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Haley. So, hi everyone. My name is Tony Bonjoro, and I work for RCC and specifically in the Office of Workplace Harassment and Violence Prevention. And to start off, I'm going to talk about generally high level about why it matters to master difficult conversations. So the first point is that it basically, when you're working on this, you're enhancing your communication skills overall, which is essential to any professional setting. So it's going to help you develop your diplomacy and your tact for any kinds of situations, whether it's difficult at the moment or it might become difficult and hopefully it doesn't just blow up in your face. So, for example, many of us have been these types of situations. So let's say, how do you tell a colleague that you don't necessarily like the changes that they made in a PowerPoint that they didn't tell you about, and it's just the day before a presentation? Or how do you ask your boss about opportunities that might exist, but you don't want to necessarily flag that you're leaving and it's a very sensitive relationship that you have? How do you respond, let's say, to your manager or someone who's evaluating you when you're told that you're not meeting expectations or that your PMA items, some of them are a surprise to you? Or what happens if you accidentally CC someone on a sensitive email that other people shouldn't have seen, and now you're not sure, what am I going to say to this person and how do I manage this relationship? So these are examples of sensitive conversations that can be difficult and can get worse if we say, I won't say the wrong thing, but if we say something might be there are better ways of saying things that you can frame something in a way that reduces tension and reduces conflict, which brings me to my next point, that mastering difficult conversations isn't just this fringe skill that applies in very isolated circumstances. We all have situations daily where we can trigger a possible resentment or possible conflict down the line. So by being better at the tricky conversations, we can reduce the tension that currently exists. We can maybe prevent the tension from happening in the first place, or we can keep the tension at a level that is not great, but keep it from escalating and getting worse. Because things that are often unresolved between colleagues and managers, etc., sometimes they may lead to resentment down the line, and you, by surprise, 3, 4 months, a year down the line, can lead to things like harassment or just really toxic environments. So it's a really long-term goal that allows that you're striving for, not just looking for that one. It's not like the World Cup or this one game, this one difficult conversation that I'm trying to address. It's really an overarching skill that allows you to manage a lot of different situations, and you want to be creating win-win scenarios. So, for example, let's say you're trying to ask, I was talking about before opportunities, you're trying to ask about opportunities to management. Well, there's specific ways that you can frame or position a request that would reduce the sensitivity around those questions. And finally, as you get better at it, you build more confidence and you're better able to put yourselves in more situations that previously to, let's say, developing that skill, you might have avoided. So you open up a world of possibilities and you open yourself up so to more feedback that otherwise you might have been more sensitive to. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide. on connecting your passion and skills with career development. And for me, these two slides work really well because actually one of my big passions and what's important to me is helping people resolve conflicts, helping people feel better in different scenarios. And the process of going through self-reflection, trying to figure out what's important to you is that does a lot of things. You go understand, it helps you understand your strengths, your skills, and values. But a key thing and the key message I want to communicate is that it allows you to make really informed career decisions that align with your personal and professional goals. And a key aspect of that is when you define when you define your key goals and know what motivates you or what's important to you, the real power is being able to figure out what doesn't work for you as opposed to just what works for you. So it gives you the power to say no to a lot of things. And that's, for me, in my experience, saying no to the opportunities that don't work has been more powerful than trying to find out what works. Because by the process of elimination, you end up slowly figuring out, oh, this is really nice. And that's how I actually have ended up in the current role that I am, which really fits and aligns with a lot of things that are important for me. So what an example of how I've done that is once I've identified what's important for me, this is what I now ask during interviews. And this is actually the question I've asked during the interview that led to this current role. I asked, what proportion of the work involves working directly with a human being? It was kind of funny and awkward because people don't necessarily ask that, but I asked that because I know that if I'm working in front of a computer for multiple hours on end, it just does not work for me. And I feel sad, I don't feel good. And that's a situation that I would like everyone to avoid. So I asked that question and I made that as part of my interview process. I also ask, how much time do you spend working alone in front of a computer? For some people, the answer would be they want to spend being isolated, but that's not something that works for me. So what this allows you to do is you create situations over time that build and build and build, and you avoid situations as much as possible where you don't feel good about the role you're in and you don't necessarily know why. But by being I think the word is intentful. I'll use that word. I'm not sure if it's real, but if being intentful and having an informed decision allows you to make those choices that compound after every choice that you make. So with that, I believe I'm passing these slides back to Antonia. Thank you very much.
Yes, you are. Thank you, Tony, for passing it back over. I just have to say it's incredible to hear from all three of you. I think we covered a good snapshot of what's to be covered in Career Bootcamp 2025. Thank you, Khadija, for talking a little bit about values and ethics, advocacy in the regions. I, for one, am in the Montreal region, working from the NCR right now. So I think there's a lot to say about that and opportunities to explore. Haley, thank you for touching on LinkedIn. Very important. I think we've all linked our LinkedIns somewhere in this, so feel free to connect and with each other, and the importance of global work culture as well, being in the public service. And Tony, thank you for touching on mastering difficult discussions and conversations. A tool, like you mentioned, is important for us, not only in our professional, but personal lives. So without further ado, which I believe I said before, I do want to, before we jump into the questions that we have, don't forget to write your questions in the Q&A box and upvote the questions you'd like most. Before we dive in further to not only just hear about the topics we'll be touching on CBC 2025, but to really hear the perspectives of our speakers in the different areas, I do want to highlight a few career resources. So we would like to take the opportunity to share a variety of helpful career resources with you all from Finn. These resources can help you with job application processes, finding a mentor, and knowing who to network with and how. The links that are up on the screen that you could access from the deck will be posted in both in the chat and shared in the wrap-up email after the event. All right, so now we will move on to the questions from the audience, of which, like I mentioned, you could use the Q&A function. Please remember to upvote what you'd like. And before we head to that, I will like to start us off with one key question to each of our speakers. We'll start with Khadija. We'll start with you. I'm going to put you on the spot, but you were first to present. So with Khadija, I'll ask, what does integrity in the public service mean to you? And can you share some examples or an example of how you've seen or would like to see it upheld in the workplace?
Thank you for that, Antonia. So I think integrity, and whenever I think about integrity in the workplace, I'm always thinking of doing what is in the public's interest. And I think that's extremely important as public servants, because our mandate is really to serve the public and to also serve the government of the day. And but I also think that integrity, integrity and working in the public interest always means, doing what is in the public good, even if that, may be a difficult choice, or even if it may not be the easiest route. And so I always think about my time, 5.5 years in the regulatory world. You got a lot of discretion, you got a lot of choice as to what you could do, the choices that you can make, and the directions that you take in the files that come your way. And so it's up to you to maintain that integrity and to say, well, I'm going to make that difficult decision and take something to court because that's the right thing to do, even though I don't necessarily like court and I don't want to go down that extra road and make more work for me. So it's very specific and very thought out decisions that we make along the way to really ultimately be able to uphold the public's confidence in the government and in a nonpartisan public service.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Khadija, and sharing your perspective. I'd like to ask the next question to Tony. So let's go back to the topic of difficult conversations. When facing a difficult conversation with a colleague or manager, what approach have you found helpful in navigating these interactions?
Okay, so before I give the specific answer, I will say that there are many different approaches that exist. And my approach that I'm going to talk about is the one I like. I like it because it's very concrete. I like it because it suits my concerns for other people. Not say the other ones don't, but okay, so I'll just say what the approach is. It's called Tactical Empathy by Chris Voss. It's actually, I don't know if people have read the book called Never Split the Difference. He's a former FBI negotiator turned businessman. He teaches negotiation tactics in a business context. So he's dealt with serial killers, he's dealt with terrorists, etc. And funnily enough, he uses empathy as a key cornerstone to get the other person to feel as respected as possible during negotiation. And so this is my answer is that this is the approach I've used. There's so many resources out there you can find online, YouTube and his book, and I'm gradually just putting it all together and I practice on a daily basis. So that's the framework. I don't know if the person's asking for a specific example or a tip, which I can give, but I don't want to hijack time. So I can provide that now or after. Antonia, what do you think?
Yeah, you could continue. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So
Since we're on the topic.
so the easiest. Okay. So the easiest, simplest example is something called mirroring, and you can use this. By the way, you can use these tactics on your kids, on your family members. Doesn't have to be your boss. Doesn't have to be your colleague. So mirroring just means that when a person says something to you, they make a statement, you're repeating the last 3 words of their sentence, but with a question. So it's inquisitive. So if I'm talking to, let's say it's my mom. Okay, my mom says, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. We have to go to dinner or else we're going to be late. And I'll just say, or else we're going to be late. It's more than 3 words, but that's the example. But you have to say it with an inquisitive, if tone is very important. You have to be inquisitive, and you have to show that you are showing deference to the other person, because that's the whole point of the approach, that you're putting the person, whether you like it or not, you're making sure the person feels like you are deferring to them. And when you do that, it does 2 things. That gets you out of a cycle where often, and I get this with different people, but sometimes you find yourself where you're asking the person something and all they'll just repeat the same 3, 4, 5 words repeatedly, and you don't get any clarification. So instead of asking, what do you mean we're going to be late? Well, we're going to be late to the party. Okay, but I still don't get it. For example, like that's some situation I've been in. But by using mirroring, for whatever reason, that technique allows the person an opportunity to use different words, which is what we want in the first place. So that allows you to get out of that trap. And that can be really good with a manager when they're trying to explain you something and you're not sure what that is, what that means. The other thing is this is really good, let's say during a PMA or whenever someone says something that surprises you and you're like, what the heck, where is this coming from? You use mirroring because it buys you time. And that makes sense in a negotiation strategy as well. Because if you're not necessarily dealing with, let's say, serial killers or a hostage situation, but it allows you to think where, let's say that your mom, your dad, or your manager or colleague are re-explaining it. You're, even if you don't agree or really think it's coming out of nowhere, this is a way that you can buy yourself time. So that's a really simple strategy that anybody could use. So to repeat, it's called mirroring. You repeat the last three words with with a question mark. I'm trying to do it in the air, and it's a question. Tone is really important. So I highly recommend that strategy, tactical empathy. There's also nonviolent communication by Rosenberg. If people want more answers, more stuff I can answer in the chat, or I can not take over, but talk later when there's more time left over. I want to make sure the other panelists get to answer.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Tony. I think I was taking notes as you were speaking. I think those techniques are bulletproof and foolproof and definitely should be something we should try. So thanks for sharing those tools. I will pass it over to Haley. There is a question. There's a couple questions around LinkedIn in the chat. So I thought maybe we could do a two-part on those. One I saw says, in what ways can you see LinkedIn as a tool for building and maintaining a professional network within the public sector? How can we ensure our profiles stand out? And then maybe a flip side, if you want to delve in after that, what should we be careful of as public servants as well?
Perfect. Okay. So as far as how it helps with your connections, it's kind of a twofold thing. So I'll give how I used LinkedIn in my personal career as an example. During the pandemic, I really started to utilize social media as far as connecting with other public service employees. So I am also in the regions. I really didn't know anybody outside of my department, and then through my YPN roles, I started to get a little bit of a broader view. So in connecting with other people, at the time it was more Twitter, but that's kind of fallen off, and now most of the GC people are on LinkedIn, and that's kind of why our focus is LinkedIn. But with connecting with people that had similar interests to where I was at in my career, that's actually how I ended up getting involved with the Federal Youth Network. And then I've kind of built out my network from there. So it's a great way of finding other like-minded people. You can use it to find out about networking events that are happening in your area or virtual events that are taking place that are of interest to you. You can reach out and connect with people that are in positions that are of interest to you. So there's lots of different ways that you can use LinkedIn to connect with people. I won't go too much into how to kind of develop your LinkedIn so it stands out, only because that's what we will be discussing at Career Bootcamp. So, but I'll leave that is tune in and you'll find out. As far as the don'ts, just keep in mind like our values and ethics in professional life. And again, we'll touch on this during Career Bootcamp. But just keeping in mind what you post, and you want to put your best foot forward when you create your LinkedIn account. So just keep that in mind when you're posting. Is this going to show me in the most positive way, or could this perhaps be perceived in a negative way? But for the rest, join us for Career Bootcamp.
I love that. Thank you, Haley. And that's honestly, sign me up. I will be the first one there. I know for a fact that everything that's done at Career, I've been to Career Bootcamp maybe more than once, maybe twice, I don't know. But it's always beneficial no matter where you are in your public service career. So thank you for that. And yes, everything we are covering today is a sneak peek. So definitely there's a lot more resources to learn from and share at Career Bootcamp 2025. So I will now move it back to Khadija. There is a question in the chat about regional employees. So for employees working in the regions, what do you think are the biggest challenges? What do you think the biggest challenges are in terms of career development, and how can we overcome these?
Yes. So I think the biggest challenge really stems from from the more limited opportunities that we have. And I think some of that, is policy driven, or at least we have seen that unintended consequence sort of emerge within the last year or so. And I think it's also partly the fact that, depending on where you are across the country, there's just certain, economic realities, right? And so we have certain positions, based out of certain regions, right? And so I don't think it's necessarily that we have less of an opportunity for growth. It's just that we need to really do the work and navigate it differently than maybe some of the folks in the National Capital Region, where positions are more concentrated there. And so I think for each of us in the regions, it's a lot about understanding what is going on in your region, right? What are those opportunities available to us? How do we network? How do we build these connections, et cetera, to create these opportunities for us? It's very possible. It's been done. We got to keep in mind that, the reality of the regions has always been consistently the reality of the regions, right? And we've all been, so many of us have been able to build their careers. So during that session, we'll share more of what those specific tips are, those specific strategies are. And I think that will provide a great learning opportunity for folks who are really looking at, accelerating their growth and continuing to grow in the region, because it definitely is possible.
All right, thank you for that, Khadija. Yes, Tony, please. And the questions are also for the other panelists if you like to add some input.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize something that Khadija said about that. I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of when you're in the regions, you have to go about it differently. You have to put more effort into it, and that really spoke to me, because basically I interpret, for me, I realized I had to be super in, like 100. I don't know how many supers I can put in there, but really intentional about how I go about things and who I speak to. So for me, a rule of thumb that I got from a book called The Unwritten Rules of a Highly Effective Job Search was the general rule of thumb was, when you speak to informally with about 40 decision makers, that's the advice I always give to people who ask me about finding a career. That's what I always strive for, and it's worked for me really well. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10, but when you build your resource and your network, it gets a lot easier. But I'm just mentioning that to support what Khadija was saying. You really have to be intentional about how you do it. And for me, that looks like going out of my way to contact and make informal interviews with the goal of trying to speak to somewhere around 40 decision makers who are potential hiring managers. They won't necessarily hire you on the spot, but they might lead you to a position somewhere else and most of them are not necessarily advertised. So that's how I actually circularly ended up here.
That's incredible. Thank you, Tony, for sharing that and that piece of your experience. I, for one, can share a little bit as well. I am in the region, And it is true. I think that you have to do a little bit more work and be intentional with what the avenues you're taking. But I think there are things there. So, whether it's in your building, whether it's a social committee, and a lot of things nowadays, since the pandemic, are much more hybrid. So definitely take a look. And even if you're not an extrovert, if you're an introvert, for example, there are still with a little bit of research, there are some systems in place all around in different formal and informal ways of connecting with those more local to you and across regions. All right. And then definitely with the help from Finn as well, such as events like this. All right. So we'll move into another question. I'll head back to Haley. There is one question I'd like to ask about global perspectives. So how do you believe exposure to global perspectives and practices could shape our approach to public service work? And can you think of any specific areas where it would be beneficial to expand our global understanding?
Perfect. Personally, I think this year I had an amazing opportunity to attend the United Nations Public Service Forum. And in that event, we got to connect with so many public service employees from around the world, and just hearing ways that we were very similar, ways that they had come up with dealing with certain issues. Like, for example, every single person we talked to said in their country it's the exact same thing, that the public service is very centered in the national capital, and then there is regional representation, but it's a work in progress as far as having the development in the regions. And that was really interesting to hear, that it's not just, we're not alone in that. And how can we learn from different projects or different ways that they have tried to engage people and build that connection, I think is a really important thing for us to learn. Understanding how we all work together, I think, is another thing. When we hear from the United Nations, there's things like the Sustainable Development Goals. That's something that all of the United Nations countries are kind of prioritizing. So when there are certain priorities for our job, then understanding where that comes from. Well, that's because we've made a commitment to this goal. And I think that that really helps us understand that bigger picture of what we do versus just I have this task and I don't really understand why I have this task. So I think that's kind of a nice way to understand what we do.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Haley. And that kind of ties into the conversation about passion that Tony was talking about before. That brings us to our next question. How did you find what your and then this could be actually to all our panelists. So please feel free to ponder and share. How did you find what you're most passionate about in the GOC? And do you have any tips for employees trying to search for their passion, and what gives them meaning? Where do we start?
Do I start that one? I only give
Sure.
my colleagues a chance to. Okay. So for me, first, given all the resources I'm suggesting, it's because I'm a person who's super systematic. I need to read a bunch on stuff and do research before I get into something, and then I find a framework that works for me. So for passion, the resource that I'm going to suggest, I read a lot of them, but the resource that I suggest is called Grit. I forget what the subtitle is, but it's by Angela Duckworth. And that allows you, that whole book is it's about success technically, but she takes about, excuse me, it's about how could you connect, finding your passion, yes, but connecting it with things that interest you. And it's about connecting your passion with, forget the other thing, your mission. I'm mentioning this because I use this book as the, what do you call it? The blueprint for how I found my I don't want to say found, but how I discovered what's important to me. So that's part one. So what did it look like for me? Well, frankly, it's a process of many years. One of the things that made it feel that was important for me in the book was to say it's okay to not have a passion or not to find something that's important to you for many years. Because often, I forget the study, but there was something like, there's a, if you don't find your passion or your, I'll use passion, but what's important to you, what's meaningful to you, like around 18 or ish, well, you don't usually don't find it until you're like 40 or something like that. So there's a good 20-year gap. And it's not to make people feel like, ah, no, I'll never find it. It's about removing that load that you feel on yourself because we constantly are, we have to find it, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is it's pretty challenging. And a key part of it refers to what I was talking about earlier, that you have to do a lot of trial and error. Some of the errors really, really hard on error, really tough, but you're doing a process of elimination. So for me, it was essentially that. So I ended up doing, so I have a PhD in organizational behavior, but I realized that, like, imagine doing 7 years or whatever, 20 years of schooling, however long it is, and then after 3 years of teaching, I'll just say no, it's not for me. That was extremely difficult, but it's an example of not, I wouldn't say error, but that was an example of something where I realized I have to do a pivot. And then I ended up trying different things. But during that period where it was really tough, that's where I read Grit and all sorts of other things, and I identified what was important for me. The way I did that, because I think the question wants something more concrete of how I did it. It's really, you're putting yourself out there all the time, and you have to be observant. So, and I would say the simplest thing is it's vague, but it's self-reflection. I did stuff like, what's that book called? Something about the parachute. I did all sorts of resources, and again, using Grit, I felt, oh, okay, I realized that I like whenever something doesn't have a person involved, that's where I felt bad. So a key part was going back to the jobs that are really bad for me or I felt really bad in, jobs where I just for whatever reason felt super anxious and had to take medication just for like this is not working. Well, I went back to those jobs. This is one strategy I do recommend. You go back to the jobs that are really bad for you. It's like dating. That's how I realized this is what type of partner I'm looking for. You go back to all the relationships or jobs that didn't work. You say, what was it about that job? Was it a manager? Okay, maybe this type of management skill is the not thing. Was it the tasking, etc. And then from there, you end up narrowing your stuff. So in a vague way, that's how I did it. But my blueprint was always Grit. There's some good stuff in there.
Amazing. And just before I pass it over to another speaker to share maybe their passion and their story, Tony, please, there have been a lot of people asking for you if you could share your resources and the books that you've highlighted and mentioned.
Yeah.
There's one or two, if you want to take a moment in the chat. Thank you. Khadija or Haley, if you'd like to share a little bit about your passion and how it went for you or your whatever you'd like to share on that.
For me, I think, well, I mean, I really think passion, well, I mean, I think really passion starts also with understanding who you are. So that's where, I always stress that whenever I chat with any new and young public servants, know who you are because then it really helps to communicate about who you are. It helps you brand yourself, helps you be able to communicate your needs, etc. And it's really through doing that, and a bit of, I don't want to call it trial and error, but a bit of, trying out different stuff that I was able to see what was out there, able to, then realize what am I really interested in? What, where do I really make an impact? And what are those opportunities available to me? And that's how I've essentially gone through, well, a part of what I have done to essentially, occupy 4 different positions in about 6 years in 2 different organizations. And so very meaningful, lots of diverse work and diverse experiences, which, always, keeps me personally motivated. And so it's a part of knowing that I love change. I love being around people. And so I've been able to eventually build that into the positions that I take on and the work that I do.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think these are great experiences to hear from. There's something to say about the public service and it allowing you to just be a lifelong learner. I think all of us are, and it really is a good environment for that because, like you said, you could always learn from different roles, from different departments, and different assignments, etc. So thanks for sharing that, Haley.
Yeah, I think for me, when I started my career, I came in as a student. I was bridged. That was my position, and my career path was following up the chain in audit. Then I'd kind of got stuck in my position. There just weren't the opportunities. And so I started getting a little bit bored. And then that's how I got involved with the networks because it was a way that I could challenge myself a little bit without moving into a different position. And that really then just changed my whole trajectory in my career and what I wanted. There was definitely a lot of self-reflection during that time. So I think for me, it was definitely that was the getting stuck and realized I was bored was that catalyst of what is it that I want to do and what can I do right now to find those opportunities. And so, yeah, taking the time to do that reflection, find what it is that you're passionate about and ways. As a reminder, the Government of Canada has so many different positions and roles and departments. So it might be a little bit more limited right now, but there are so many different opportunities out there. It's just a matter of finding out what it is that you want. I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. Thank you, Haley. And I think there is something to say about that. I could share a little bit as well. I started as a student as well in the public service a few years back and started in a different department. And, if you have a background, I had a background in environmental assessment and education technology and communication. So multiple different interests before public service. And there's something to say about I think Tony mentioned it before, seeing what you've done in the past that you don't like to know as like a process of elimination, but also seeing and taking with you, I would say, or I would add, of what you did like. And I think there's ways of bringing that into what you do. And odds are you can always either find an area that to work in or a team that really resonates with what you're passionate about. If it's not the work directly that you're doing, it might be the mission of the department you're in, or it might also could be you can find some of your passions in things that you do on the side of desk. For example, like participating with Fin activities, or like, for example, from my end, my pre-public service life, I was organizing events like this for McGill University and students and alumni and all these fun activities. And it's always been a passion. So that brought me here today with all of you. So enjoying this interaction and learning and engaging from each other. And there's something to say about networks as well, part of the youth network at my department, but there's networks for all different types, employee networks within departments on different values and passions that might resonate with all of you. So keep those opportunities in mind as well. And with, of course, always manager approval, there's ways to get involved and stay involved in areas that link to what you're passionate about or your values. So with that, I do want to see if there are any other questions. Let's see. An upvote. Don't forget, if you do have questions as they come, you can put them in. We do have around 7 minutes left with all of you. Did any of the panelists maybe want to speak to something that was asked before they didn't get a chance to speak about? Okay, I see some head shaking. It's okay. So there is one of the upvoted. Maybe Tony, we bring it back to Tony in the conversation about personality assessment. You said we were talking about before. Do you recommend, there's a question here, which personality assessment do you recommend we take prior to CBC? I noticed it as one of the tips on your slide. Mm-hmm.
So that was, I don't have one specifically in mind. I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but when I use them, I know, okay, so there's some in the grit book for sure. There's some, I think there's Myers-Briggs as well. But I'm the names escape me. But that point for me, that was more you try any kind. Like for me, there's not one specific personality test to rely on. You're basically the way when I did them, I used them as a jumping off point just to get a sense of self-reflection and say, okay, do I actually agree with this? Do I not? So that's how I would recommend using them as opposed to relying on one, because the real meat or lentils, if you're vegetarian, of the approach. Thanks for the laugh, Antonia.
I might use that one day.
Yeah.
I will think of
Uh,
you.
for me, the real thing is, regardless of the personality test you're using, is I think what the rest of the panelists are saying, the trial and error part and seeing how you feel about it is the key thing, because you can use the personality test as a guide in a sense, and a guide saying, okay, let me try this out and see how I feel, but it's not going to be the thing that I'm going to say, oh, this is where I have to go. So really trying it out and doing, I don't know if there's another word, trial and error, but trying things out for 3-4 days, say, no, this doesn't work, and not being afraid. I think a key part is like I've been in 3 positions where I tried a job, and after 3 months it was just so bad, and it was really hard to say no. So at one point I was jobless, my wife was paying for a lot of the things, and we had a kid, so like, okay, how are we going to pay for this stuff? But not everyone has a support system, so it's hard. But if you're able to, being okay, I don't want to make this recommendation actually, but the being able to leave a job is something ideal, can be something that can be helpful, because you often feel stuck. I'm not saying leave every job as soon as you don't like it, but that was one thing for me that was really helpful, because I realized, all right, this is not working. Let me go and find something else that's closer, because then we get into that. It just gets worsens and worsens and worsens over time.
Mhm. No, I understand. Oh, definitely. And I saw Khadija unmute herself. So did you want to add something to that?
Well, just on the topic of personality assessments, our session will be mentioning several of those personality assessments that we do recommend. So stay
Amazing.
tuned for that session as well, because that topic will come back up in that session.
Very excited.
Yeah, I was also here taking a look at some of the questions that we got, and there's, I think, a good question that we could tackle right now. And
Sure.
it's from someone who works from home and has never met their colleagues in person and thinks that it's difficult to have difficult conversations with their manager and with their colleagues. And so they're looking for advice. And of course, as they say, in writing, things can sound rude, or overall they can come off differently, or can come off not as you intended them in writing. And so definitely having face-to-face verbal conversations is oftentimes a better choice. I think what it comes my answer really to this scenario is, I think it comes down to relationship building. And so I think, even if you are someone who is working from home full time and has little to no opportunities to interact with your colleagues in person, you got to then create those opportunities virtually for, informal chatter, to get to know the person on a personal level. What are they interested in? How do they spend their time? Try to start up those conversations. Try to ask for meetings, even just to discuss simple questions, for instance. Try to create any of those opportunities to build a personal connection so that they know who you are, and you can build that trust. And so once you start to know who they are, once you start to trust, the more you can open up to them more and more.
Right.
And
That's
so
a
I
very good
think that
point.
is how I would tackle it.
Amazing. Thank you, Khadija, for sharing that insight and for plucking that important question out. I'd like to, if there are any, just open it for any other last comments from the panelists. If not, we'll move into the closing, as I realized our conversations went on, which is actually a great thing. That means that there is some interest and a lot of feedback from everyone about these topics. So again, for more please sign up and we will see you at Career Bootcamp. So I'll move into our closing. Thank you so much for the panelists. This session will be recorded so people can come back. You yourself can go back and gain the knowledge anytime you'd like. We hope that by now you have understood some quick tips on developing effective resume writing skills to showcase your strengths and qualifications, ensuring your application stands out, obtained a high-level understanding the application, different aspects of the Career Bootcamp as well. And we will be covering a lot of these tips and tricks in the sessions at CBC 2025. We do have a polling question. We'd like to ask all of you to take a couple seconds. I believe we have that polling question set up. I'm just checking with the team. Yes, so maybe take a couple seconds. The results, will not be shared. Was the session good use of your time? Yes, no, I don't know. And if not, then definitely come back in CBC and see if that was. That's for sure. But then we definitely hope it was. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our second and final session of our virtual learning series, Career Bootcamp Preparation Series. We hope to see you all in January for Career Bootcamp 2025, which will be kicked off with our speed mentoring series of events the week of January 13th. At Career Bootcamp 2025, you'll hear from experienced professionals like these ones on important topic, like our speakers today, on important topics to advance your career, such as how to build your brand, strategies for mastering difficult conversations, how to navigate values and ethics, and all of the wonderful topics we touched on today, especially about our values and ethics and how to network as public servants. So don't miss out on this chance to invest your time and on your future. Mark your calendar, spread the word, and stay tuned for more details. So the link will be in the chat to register. Resources, again, are available on our wiki page, on the Fin wiki page, and the recording of this event, like mentioned, will be on our YouTube channel, as well as our podcast series. So thank you again to all our wonderful panelists, to all the learners that connected today across regions, and we hope to see you back at Fin in 2025. Thank you and take care for now. Bye, everyone.